name is Hannah Bressler. I'm a publisher at Raw Books Press. We make books of poetry, usually short volumes or illustrated books for adults that are hybridized, part fiction, part poetry. Poetry and is a video series that pairs poetry with another topic. I titled this video Poetry and Black History. What I'm thinking of specifically is poetry and processing racial oppression, specifically the poetry and the aftermath of slavery, Black slavery in the Americas. I apologize for the implication that all Black history is just oppression and slavery. That's definitely not true at all. There's an incredible amount of stories and art and culture that is part of Black history, and it's really important to differentiate. That said, I didn't come up with a better title for this video, so feel free to suggest something in the comments that's more appropriate. The way that people digest the pain of their oppression is something I always want to learn from. I think these three poets in particular do it really well. This first book is Citizen by Claudia Rankine. I wasn't very interested in this book when it first came out. I didn't really understand what it was about. It's written in a way structurally that I hadn't seen before, so I just wasn't used to reading that kind of work. It's a lot of prose poetry. It's not heavy on the lyricism or imagist ideas, which is the kind of poets that I trained with. I felt like it was a deep experience of pain, of the pain of people seeing you as not a real human, of projecting all these things onto you because you're Black. And that's, yeah, it was just sort of floored me. It was published in 2014, which you would think it was a response to the Black Lives Matter movement, but actually hearing Claudia Rankine talk about the book, she was writing this over a long period of time and thinking about it. And even the visual art, as you can see on the cover, which is a hoodie, I don't know if you can see that very well. This art, people think it's a reference to Trayvon Martin, who was killed and was wearing a hoodie. But actually, the artist who made that piece created it way before Trayvon Martin was even born. He was talking about this kind of projections onto Black people for a long time. And it's just so clear to me that Claudia Rankine was thinking about it for a really long time. This book is a kind of meditation on the, what I think she calls them microaggressions, aggressions done against Black people. It's so much about being delegitimized. So much of the book is about not being seen as a regular, hardworking, good person, but being seen as like criminal or as an overreactor. If somebody does something racist to you and you're like, hey, that was really racist, and then they're like, oh, well, you should get over it. That feeling, it just feels like a cumulative thing where it's just hitting you one thing after another, after another, after another. By the end of the book, you're like, God, you know, it's like, it's not conclusive. And I think, I don't want to misquote Claudia Rankine because she's so smart. You should look her up on YouTube on your own. But she says, you know, what is the ending to the story? I'd like to know. I have hopes for the ending, but I don't know what it is. She also very subtly covers topics about Black performance, about the commercializing Black anger and where that comes from, and what the purpose of art is, and confronting a cultural wound. It's a pretty complex book. I just didn't grasp it the first couple times I read the book. So if you're thinking about reading it and you're like, I don't know, I'm kind of turned off by the style, like, it might be worth looking again and meditating on it. In other news, Claudia Rankine is working on a book now which is about the construct of whiteness, and hearing her talk about it, I'm like, ooh, this is so powerful, I really want it. So that's up and coming, and I don't know when it's coming out, but I'm pretty excited. She's also working on a documentary about trauma being passed down generation to generation and like the science behind it, and so she's interviewing all these interesting people on the repercussions of intergenerational trauma. So I'm like, that's obviously so interesting to me. If you have seen me in any other form of social media, that's something I read about and think about a lot. Also, another book by Claudia Rankine is called Don't Let Me Be Lonely. I'm just mentioning it here because it's kind of off topic, but it's a great book. It was one of the few books that as soon as I start reading it, I'm like so immersed in the voice and the way, the feeling of the book. I mean, it's sort of like a love and a criticism. I don't even want to say toward America, but sort of toward America. Next poem I'm talking about, it's not a whole book, it's just one poem. It's called Schooner's Flight. It's pretty long. It follows a poet sailor. The sailor had an affair with his mistress, Maria Concepcion, which is, to me, sounds very like Spanish name, and he left his children and wife for her, and then he deeply regretted his actions, and a lot of the story is him struggling with that feeling between his children and his wife and his mistress, and he's sort of like struggling with loyalty. There's a lot of stuff on the ship that happens because it's set in the Caribbean. There's this feeling that's explored within the book. I think it's a particular feeling when you come from a mixed heritage, that especially if you come from a heritage that is part indigenous and part European, because European people did a lot of terrible stuff to indigenous people. And there's a feeling that even if a culture might be part of your history and your ancestry, like maybe you don't resonate with it, and just the feeling of like, oh, I should be loyal to this, but this is what I'm actually choosing, and the advantage of choosing that. I think it's hard to write within that tension. This poem holds a lot of conflicting feelings for him. It's more lyrical, it's more, you get the flow and rhythm. I think of him as a writer who's very aware of the wound of colonialism, but not willing to tell the story in a black and white kind of way. He's able to hold space for multiple views in himself about like sort of the post-colonial world and what that means for the people living in those places that were colonized, and now the governing power has left, but so much of that culture is mixed in, and so much of that mix is part of the oppression still. Last book before I end this is called In the Language of My Captor. It's gotten a lot of press in the past year. This book, I'll just read the cover for you because it's pretty interesting. Historical persona poems and prose memoir are at the center of this book. They address the illusory freedom of both black and white Americans. In the book's 3 sequences, McCrae explores the role mass entertainment plays in oppression and confronts the myth that freedom can be based upon power to dominate others. There's a little bit more, but I think I had never found a book quite like this. It explores different personas within the structure of slavery that was happening in the United States, and so sometimes it's from the perspective of a white person or a black person or a mixed race child, and everybody has a different feel for it, but you can feel the weight of their restrictions within those roles, and it just kind of blew me away. I had never seen a book like that had done different voices and different personas so well. Also, he's a smart, creative person. I think he's worth paying attention to, generally. The idea of forming a book around all these different perspectives of one situation, I just think is really brilliant. I really enjoyed reading his book.